Everyone. I'm calling this meeting of the Public Safety Communications Task Force to order. It is 11:03 on June 28th, 2023. I am Barbara Neal, Executive Director of the Enhanced 911 Board, and I want to welcome everyone to our very first task force meeting. Just so everyone is aware, as we just mentioned, this meeting is being recorded via Microsoft Teams. The recording will be posted publicly following the meeting on the task force webpage, which is hosted on the Department of Public Safety website.
Mandy, could you put that in the chat, the link to the website, please, Mandy?
I will.
Thank you.
Commissioner, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Barb. We'll start with a quick roll call of task force members and guests. When your name is called, please acknowledge that you're here. Guests may also include the name of any sector that you may be representing if you want. And then we're going to have an opportunity for task force members to do a bit of a more detailed introduction of themselves in just a moment. Barb, I don't have the list of members in front of me, but I think I can do an okay job on roll call because I know you and I are here, and that's 2/7 of the way there.
Yep.
So representing the Vermont Association of Chiefs of Police is Jim Mack. You're here, Jim. Paul White is representing the previous work group that was here. That was referenced in statute. So I see Paul is here.
Good morning.
Mayor Michael Donjus, you're representing the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, correct?
That's correct.
Excellent. Michael Wright, you are representing the Vermont Ambulance Association?
That is correct.
And Ron Kumitz, you are representing the Vermont Fire Association, or is it, I'm sorry if I got the acronym incorrect.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can.
Vermont State Firefighters Association.
Fabulous. So Barb, I believe we have all 7 task force members present for this first meeting.
Perfect. Excellent.
Great. The next order of business is to have each of the task force members do a brief introduction. I'll go around again and ask you to identify a little bit of your background, what you do, what your background is that might be relevant to the task force's work. And a man who needs very little introduction, I'll start with Mr. Paul White.
May I point of order, Jen?
Sure.
The beginning of the meeting is the only time when members should be offered an opportunity to amend the agenda.
Oh, we'll get there. We have the agenda coming up next. You mean before they do an introduction, they have to talk about the agenda?
I'm not going to die on that hill.
Okay, very good.
Well, good morning. My name is Paul White. I was the chair of last year's regional dispatch working group, much to my chagrin. My background is I was with the Vermont State Police for a total of 30 years, 24 full-time capacity and another 6 as an auxiliary trooper part-time. At the time I retired in end of 2015, I was a captain. I was the troop commander for what was then A Troop. The department's been through some reorganization since then, but at the time I retired, I was in charge of Williston, St. Albans, and Middlesex, including the Williston Dispatch Center, Communication Center. I am also chair of the select board for the town of Barre, which is how I ended up on this last year's working group. I was actually appointed by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns to represent the league on last year's working group, and ended up finding myself elected chair.
Very good. Well, thanks, Mr. White. Ron, do you want to go next?
Hi, good morning, Commissioner. Sorry for the delay. My name's Robbie Blish. I'm the Chief of Police of Woodstock Police Department. Oh, am I jumping the gun?
I'm looking for Ron Kumitz for each of the task force members to do an intro. And Ron,
that is me. I thought you said
there
Rob.
You go. Sorry, Rob. I meant Ron Kumitz.
Hi there. I am the chief of the Albert Volunteer Fire Department, but my particular specialty, which involves communications, is that I've spent the last 45 years employed in the communications, land mobile, and the radio and television broadcast industries. So I have a particularly good understanding of RF systems and what makes them tick.
Very good. Thank you very much. Jim, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is James Mack. I'm the PSAP administrator at Shelburne Communications Center. Been involved in emergency services for the last 39 years, 35 of which have been in dispatch.
Great. And do you prefer James over Jim?
I answer to just about anything.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wright, do you go by Michael or Mike or something else?
Michael's fine.
Michael, perfect. Go
So
for
my
it.
name is Michael Wright. I'm the EMS chief and CEO of Calix Ambulance over in St. Jay. This is going on 30 years for me, all of which have been here at Calix. Also the Vermont EMS District 5 chair that oversees our area here. And I'm also a state of Vermont death investigator going on 23 years doing that. So I think I bring, I still do clinical time as a licensed paramedic in the state and still passionate about clinical care and still jump on the truck. So I think I bring some not only administrative experience, but I have a passion really about dispatching. And Barbara will know, I don't know how many people reach out for quality review and such of E911 cases, but I've been pretty passionate about reviewing cases all the way from the start to the finish and learning from those and improving any weaknesses that we find in our system. So thanks for having me join and obviously representing the Vermont Ambulance Association.
Very good. Thank you. And Mayor Donges, did I say that correctly?
Close enough. It's Dunges. That's quite all right.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. Mike Dunges, recently elected mayor of Rutland City. I guess it's not recent anymore. It's been 3 months now. So prior to being the Rutland City mayor, and where I hope I can add some value here for VLCT and the overall group is I've been in the technology space for about 20 years. I started out in broadcast engineering, and then I moved into networking technology. So I've got IP, TCP IP, integration. So voice over IP is a big part of my space. I worked on that for over 15 years. P25 integrations are pretty much something I did for 7 years at Cisco Systems. So I understand like the overall infrastructure pieces and the connectivity and the critical nature of redundancy and whatnot. So that's hopefully what I can bring to as far as value goes.
Very good. Thank you very much. Barb, before I jump to you and me, I'd just like Callie to take an opportunity to introduce herself as our administrative support.
Hi, everyone. My name is Callie Audette. I am the admin service coordinator for one of our Division of Fire Safety regional offices.
Thank you for being willing to lean into this work. We are grateful very much,
Happy to
even
be
right
here.
from the get-go. Barb, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I am Barb Neal. As I said at the beginning, I'm executive director of the Enhanced 911 Board, and I've been in that role for 8 years. Prior to that, I was about 12 years as a training coordinator, also for the 911 Board. And prior to that, I was a dispatcher for the Vermont State Police when Middlesex was a thing, and then later in Williston. And then even prior to that, I had some experience as a volunteer on my local ambulance service, both in the field and in the dispatch seat for that. So happy to meet everyone and get to work on this project.
Great, thank you. And my name is Jennifer Morrison. I'm the Commissioner of Public Safety. Prior to joining the public safety team in 2020, I spent 23 and a half years in municipal policing in both the Burlington Police and the Colchester Police. And I served in a variety of roles and functions, including oversight of dispatch, roles as chief of police in both agencies, and a bunch of other fun stuff along the way. So hopefully I can bring a reasonable operational and leadership lens to the work of this task force. That being said, I know that Callie had an interest in noting people's name down. If you are a guest, you are welcome to drop your name in the chat if it's not obvious from how you're signed on to the system, but there's no requirement that you tell us your name. You're allowed to observe and be a fly on the wall if you would like to. With introductions wrapped up, I'd like to take this opportunity to see if any of the members of the task force would like to recommend any modification to today's agenda as it was circulated and posted publicly. All right, seeing none. Barb, I'm turning it back to you.
Okay. All right. Guideline, I was hesitating, Commissioner, do we want to give the guests an opportunity to introduce themselves, or we'll save that for public comment?
As you wish. Yeah, it's fine by me if people want to. Why don't you throw your hand up if you'd like to introduce yourself? We're happy to know who's with us and benefit from your knowledge of relevant activities. All right, there's no eager beavers in the room, so let's carry
No
on.
hands at this point, so we'll carry on. So before we get too far into the agenda, we thought it important to go over some general guidelines and expectations for these meetings, the task force meetings, and for members in general. So as we mentioned earlier, these meetings are public. They will be conducted in accordance with Vermont's open meeting law. We will likely move into executive session during some meetings to discuss topics such as contract negotiations, proprietary or specific system security issues. But again, in accordance with open meeting law. This meeting and all meetings will be recorded. We will post the recording to the task force webpage. That webpage will also house task force meeting agendas, minutes, and the public resources and materials that the task force will be using during our work. For meeting duration, our goal for today is to complete our work within 90 minutes. If we happen to go over that 90-minute window, we will have a hard stop at 1 o'clock. The duration of future meetings can be up for discussion and adjusted as appropriate for whatever work needs to be done at that time. I do want to call everyone's attention to the per diem reimbursement that is available to certain members of the task force. So except for members that are regularly employed by the state, other members are entitled to a per diem in the amount of $150 for each day spent in the performance of our duties. And all of the members, state employees or not, are entitled to reimbursement for actual and necessary expenses related to task force work. So if you intend to request a per diem or an expense reimbursement, please reach out to the co-chairs, that's the Commissioner Morrison and myself, and we will process those through the DPS infrastructure for such things. And on that note of administrative support, the legislative language does specify that Department of Public Safety will provide that support, which includes Callie, who you met earlier. You can expect to get meeting invites and other information related to the meetings from Callie's email address, so watch for that. DPS will also host the web page and eventually be involved in contractual work. Well, actually, they already are to some extent, more on that later, but contractual work and financial services support and similar administrative things. On the topic of public records requests and how we would like to see them handled, all public records requests received by task force members must be directed to the co-chairs. So send them to Commissioner Morrison and myself. They will be processed by DPS administrative staff in that support role that they're statutorily required to provide. And of course, you all know that we can expect to be handling some amount of information that is exempt from public release. So it is important, critically important, that that process be followed to ensure that the task force is in compliance with the law. On a similar note, I want to talk about confidentiality. So task force members will be having access to information that is exempt from public disclosure pursuant to Vermont Public Records Law. And in order to ensure that we are all clear on how such information will be handled, we will be asking each task force member to enter into a non-disclosure agreement that will outline the expectations for the handling of non-public information as the task force work continues. And anytime any questions come up about whether certain information is exempt from public disclosure, please direct those questions right away to Commissioner Morrison and myself. Some examples, though, include executive session discussions, discussions related to in-progress procurements, including draft RFPs or requests for proposals and so on. And certainly discussions related to specific system security information or infrastructure. So those are the examples. There may be other things. We expect to have the non-disclosure agreement, which I'll refer to as an NDA from now on. We'll expect to have that language completed late next week or in advance of our next meeting, might be a better way to say that, so that you will have an opportunity to review that and sign prior to our next meeting.
Thanks, Barb. And
yep.
legal support is also part of the administrative support that between DPS and the Attorney General's office that we will provide to this task force. So if we do run into legal questions, we do have resources in that regard. So I wanted to take a quick minute to review our mission, the underpinning legislation, and give you a little bit of an update on some of the work that has been happening in the background prior to today's meeting. So while Barb and I are legislatively appointed as the co-chairs of this task force, this is not a Department of Public Safety task force, and it is not an E911 board task force. It is a task force that stands alone with the support of state government. And obviously we're going to be relying on my shop for various administrative tasks, but the decisions that have to happen around approving services, directions that we go in, et cetera, are all the work of the task force, not the Department of Public Safety. And obviously if that ever gets murky or we need to revisit that, then that's part of your job, is to make sure that we are bringing the appropriate level of decision making to the task force and not forging ahead in directions we have not agreed on. So yes, you will probably have to keep tabs on that, as I tend to be a linear, we've done this, now we go do that. So that's part of the work of the task force, is keeping us all in agreement on what the priorities are and what directions we go. We expect that the task force will review, edit, and eventually approve the request for proposal or requests for proposal that will direct and then you will help direct DPS staff to post these RFPs at the appropriate time so that we can put it out there for potential bidders. Any questions that we receive during the RFP process, it's not uncommon for an interested vendor to submit written questions for clarification on parts of the document, et cetera. Anything that we receive, we will bring it back to the task force, but it will also be publicly posted. So any response that we write in response to questions from anyone relative to the RFP will go up on our website so that everybody has the benefit of the same information. The task force may choose to include other people as part of our RFP review process. For instance, there are people with relevant experience within state government who could provide insight into how other RFP processes of the same magnitude have gone, or of the same type of work, same type of scope of work, but we can get to that. And then upon selection of the vendor, once the task force agrees on the vendor and the scope of work being awarded to any given vendor, you would direct that we DPS enter into contract negotiations and eventually bring back a fully executed contract for your approval, or a about to be executed contract for the task force approval. And also the task force will be responsible for deciding when milestones that are laid out in the RFP have been met, and you will authorize payment of milestone payments by my staff. So these are just trying to distill out some of the roles that we'll be turning to you for. And also any concerns about contractor performance, types of deliverables, the way they're getting to bringing us those deliverables will be brought to the task force for discussion and decisions on next steps. So think I'll pause there and ask if there are any questions from task force members at this point. We've got a little more to go over. Go ahead,
I
Paul.
have one. Maybe I should reserve my question or comments until I see what the document actually looks like, but I'm a little curious why the need for a non-disclosure agreement. You know, I've served on a lot of different boards, both government and non-government related, and I've never been, I don't want to say not trusted, but I've never been put in a position where I was asked to sign an NDA for volunteer service on a board before, and I'm curious
Sure, right. No, that's
what's
a great-
driving that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So this was a little bit of a lessons learned from some other spaces that partners across state government have worked in, where they have discovered that drafts of documents that were not intended for subsequent sharing beyond the actual group members were being forwarded to other people. And then, of course, that proliferates as it goes further and further.
Mhm.
And it was getting to be so common that they were having to watermark drafts individually per task force member so that they knew if it showed up,
Right.
where
Who
it came from. Like
Right.
there was no control over documents
Mhm.
that are considered sensitive or could impact the fairness of awarding contracts. So we're going to talk about the fact that, like, if somebody on the task force feels we could benefit from somebody, in your industry or in your professional life, and we could benefit from their consultation as we develop the RFP, we can decide that that's okay, but we would want to sit the person down in a space where that actual document does not leave our control, where it stays only with the 7 task force members. And if they want to have eyes on, that we facilitate a bit of a in-camera review and collect their comments type thing. This is really just to prevent what we've seen happen in other boards and committees that have turned out to be an administrative mess, candidly.
Okay.
So that's
I
really,
think-
that's the only
Okay.
reason.
And I think I know the answer, but do we anticipate all meetings will be done remotely like this?
That's an action item coming up for you guys
Okay.
to tell us
Okay.
what you think.
Okay,
I
thank
think
you.
too, I would just add to the commissioner's response about the NDAs, Paul, is, one of the reasons that those problems may have existed in other spaces is that there wasn't a clear, that perhaps members did not have a clear understanding of what the expectations were. So for you and me and the commissioner have worked in state government, and we know, what those expectations are, but perhaps not everybody else does. So we wanted to make sure that it was clear from the get-go, given the enormity, especially of this work. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner, I think it's back over to me if you're all set.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So asking if everyone has, every task force member has had an opportunity to review the language from H494. So this is posted on our webpage and also was sent to the task force members some time ago, perhaps a week ago. Everybody read it, hopefully? Thumbs up? Okay,
Yes.
nods. Okay, great. Excellent. If you need a refresher, check on the website or check your email, or certainly we can send it out again. I do want to call out the fact that the language really states what our mission is, and that is oversight and management of the transition to a statewide reliable, secure, and interoperable public safety communication system comprising integrated 911 call taking and regional dispatch systems, and to ensure that system is equitably and sustainably financed and universally accessible by all persons in the state. So just a small amount of work outlined there. We have done, the commissioner went over several of the things that we or kind of hinted at some of the work that has been done to date. So in anticipation of a task force decision to issue an RFP, request for proposals for subject matter expertise to complete that mission, the commissioner and I have been working with the state's Agency of Digital Services and others in state government to develop a draft RFP to complete the work, the vast amount of work that is outlined in the legislative language, and anything else that the task force determines is needed. So that will be discussion point. We are hopeful to have a copy of that draft for your review prior to our next meeting, and expect to have it as an item for discussion at the next meeting as well. And if that schedule changes at all, we'll certainly keep you updated and informed as we go along. Please remember that the RFP draft is part of a procurement process and is not public information at this time. Task force members may also wish to review last year's Regional Dispatch Working Group report to have a sense of the most recent work that's been done on this subject. That document is posted on the task force webpage under resources. And I'll just add here that I've made several mentions of the task force web page and the Department of Public Safety website, but we were all notified this morning that State of Vermont websites, vermont.gov, is down today. So hopefully they'll get that resolved soon, and you will be able to access that information online. If you need anything in the meantime, certainly reach out to either the commissioner or myself or Callie or all of us. And back to you, Jen.
Okay, any questions at this point about what Barb just covered? Great. So we want to talk a little bit about next steps. I would say it's an immediate action item for the committee to point me and Barb in the right direction. We have significant concerns around the dates that are in the piece of legislation. They're completely unattainable. And we are concerned that if we include them in the RFP language, that we will scare off potential bidders. So it is our intent to not use those dates in the RFP, but to basically say, you know, the work will be completed on a timeline as determined, like a reporting interval and completion dates determined by the task force. But if we put in some of those dates, like nobody's going to bid on the project because it's impossible to do. So we would ask for a motion and a second and discussion for the task force to direct myself and Barb to go back to our legislative contacts with these concerns and to alert them that we know we cannot comply with the dates and that we don't intend to use those dates in the RFP.
Look at that
So
for a
moved.
motion now? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so moved.
And seconded.
Any discussion about doing that? Anything else you want us to message to legislative leadership while we're visiting in on dates?
Sounds really
None.
reasonable.
No-
Sorry,
none that-
Paul.
None that are fit for print.
Right, right on, right on. Okay, hearing no discussion, I guess just ask you to signal your agreement with that motion by saying aye.
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 Right, Callie, that sounds like a unanimous. Because I saw everybody's hands and mouths moving and Ron's little bubble doing the heartbeat. Very good.
I have a little bubble.
You have a little bubble. It's like, well, it's a circle that says RK. And when you talk, it pulsates. It's kind of cool. Okay. So when I think about next steps, I immediately want to talk about what does the task force see as the next steps? And if you don't see any, I mean, we've already kind of put out there that the RFP is front and center for us, but is there anything that we are being tunnel visioned about in terms of next steps? Because for us, we've been focusing on getting a credible draft of an RFP into your hands so that we can actually put it on the street, because there's going to be some turnaround time.
I mean, my only comment would be until we see the RFP, we may not be able to determine next steps outside of revising it, right? Because we don't know what we don't, as a group, don't know what's in it yet. So,
Right. It's a big task, actually. Now that we've been working on it for a few weeks, it's actually a pretty big task, and
I
we're
can
hopeful to get you a draft before the next meeting. Are there any resources that the task force feels that you need or immediately came to mind when you were like, oh, look, I'm on this task force now? Is there any resources that you think we should be providing or finding a way to provide in the next few weeks? And I can leave that as an open question for you to circle back to us if you think of something. Or this from the state, we're here to help. So the next item that I wanted to talk about in terms of future next steps is meeting cadence, guidelines on limits, time limits of meetings, and format. I can tell you that our recommendation right now is that we meet again the week of July 10th. Which is also an item here to talk about. But in terms of cadence, we think that until we get an RFP out on the street, that we should be meeting every other week. We don't want to burn people out by saying, let's hit it every week, but we also don't think we can stretch it out to monthly.
Commissioner, I would agree with that. Last year's working group, as you know, met every Wednesday from the last Wednesday in July through the last Wednesday in November. And it was a pretty heavy lift for essentially a volunteer board position. So I agree that, I mean, the timelines are too short to meet only once a month.
Right.
But to once a week was too much. So I think every other week would be good.
I think that's fair.
Okay. Barb and I had discussed time limits of meetings, and of course, that's a little bit of a wiggly statement because there's public meetings, and then if we adjourn to go to executive session, that would be a different clock that's ticking. Barb and I were hopeful that any public meetings would max out at 90 minutes, and that if we had to go into executive session, that we would still have a hard stop at a 2-hour total time commitment per meeting. We say this mostly for the benefit of folks who have other jobs. I mean, right? Or no job at all, which means you're really in this. But you could get that big fat $150 reimbursement, but we won't go there. Do people feel that those are reasonable guidelines, or do you want to suggest something else?
I think those are reasonable guidelines. I think that asking to take a 2-hour chunk out of a day is reasonable. I mean, unless you have brain surgery scheduled to be doing to that day, and the patient can't wait. I don't see any problem with that. Once it gets beyond that, then it can start to interfere with things and become cumbersome.
Okay. And I wanted to ask the group's input on the format of the meeting. We could do all virtual. We could do some that are hybrid where there's an option. I think we should always have an option for virtual to cut down on commute time for people who have other commitments. But we could certainly set up some meetings that have an in-person option. Right now, at this moment, I have no preference. I don't think Barb has a strong preference. But we wanted to hear from other members of the task force about their preference. Do you anticipate mostly doing remote?
I think the mayor had his hand up. Yeah.
Is that okay if I speak up? So I think that remote's great. I do think that especially being able to get together on occasion to like sit down and look at the RFP side by side and be able to just quickly, because I mean, just even in that moment, right, the pause waiting for people, like we can be really efficient if we're in person once in a while, getting things done. So there may be opportunity to do hybrid. I like that option, keeping that option available.
So I think as we come out, go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
No, I will echo what Mayor Dunn just said. I think if there's going to be like a presentation, if we're going to have a guest speaker, or if they're going to be showing a PowerPoint or handing things out, I would prefer to be in person myself, but I'm not very far away from Montpelier or Waterbury. for those coming from, say, Johnsbury, Rutland, Shelburne, I could see where that might not be convenient. So I personally, I don't like hybrid. I like either to have everybody remote like we're doing now or everybody in the room, but I realize that's not always attainable. So I would agree with what the mayor said.
So I was thinking that for the next couple meetings anyway, we could call it as we set up the next meeting based on what we think we're going to be doing at that meeting. And then at some point we just sort of settle into either they're all hybrid or they're all this or they're all that. But I agree we have to have some level of flexibility. And I do agree that there are going to be times where physically being together is going to be more expedient. So
Agreed.
I think when I think about that, it leads me to say, and I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, Barb, but the next meeting, in our estimation, next week is a bit tough. It's quick turnaround. It's a 1 week mark. So in order to keep with a 2 week cadence, it would be a meeting time during the week of July 10th. And we are not committed or married to the Wednesday mornings at 10 o'clock. And in fact, are wide open to hearing from others what they think would be a great time for the next meeting. And if you want that to be a recurring day of the week and time, or if you want to plan them all on a one-off and vary the time of day that we do it. We could certainly do some later in the day to sort of edge towards the end of people's workday, if that were meaningful, if that were helpful to some of you who have other jobs.
Wednesday works fine for me. I think that
Yeah.
during the summer in particular, the only day that is out of the question for me is that I'm not available on Tuesdays, but otherwise I'm pretty flexible.
Okay, thanks, Ron. James,
I
what
agree.
are you thinking?
Just about any day is good with me because my schedule's all over the place. So whatever you end up picking, I'll work around it.
Paul?
Wednesdays work well for me. I think that was not that last year's working group has anything to do with this year's, but Wednesday was the day last year and it seemed to be as good a day as any. It's, you know, avoiding Mondays, avoiding Fridays. And I would prefer to have it a recurring, you know, if we could plan on it being, you know, every other Wednesday from here till duration or something like that, whatever day we happen to pick would be helpful for me, but you know, obviously whatever is best for the group is what we'll do.
Mayor Dungus, what do you think?
I mean, I'm great with reoccurring Wednesdays. The consistency is for me key, right? Just having it at the same time so I can plan around it. If no one minds, I don't mind this time of day as long as you don't mind watching me eat while we talk. Every once in a while.
Totally okay.
All right, cool. I'll turn off my camera to not be rude, but yeah, this works out really well.
Perfect. Mike, right?
Yeah, Mike's
Yeah, agreed with everyone else. Consistency would be key. So just locking in on the same day every other week.
Callie, how about your schedule?
I'm pretty flexible. Doesn't really matter to me. Whenever you guys need me here, I'll be here.
Oh, that's very kind. All right. I don't think I missed anyone. If I had my druthers, I would push this by 15 minutes simply because I have a standing 10 to 11 meeting that almost inevitably goes within 5 minutes of the hour every time. And it's also a pretty large group with pretty intense topic. So a 15-minute breather would not be the worst thing in the world if we went 11:15 to 12:45 and then of course leave that extra half hour of wiggle room. Does that work for everyone? 11:15? Okay. So we'll do that for our next meeting. And if we all agree that that worked out well, then maybe we just make that the recurring thing. Want to get us locked in too soon and have somebody go, oh, I forgot. I have Rotary that day or whatever. Okay, very good. Barb, I think I'm turning it back to you now.
I think you are. I just want to, you know, we brought up a few things on the discussion of next steps. These were things we thought we might need to be thinking about, but I'm wondering if the task force members are seeing something that maybe we've missed. What else do we need to be thinking about right now? So sorry, Commissioner, I went a little off script there, if you will, but I wonder if they have any input at this point. Okay. Not right now, sounds like. Okay, so next item on the agenda then is the election of the task force vice chair. So now that there's at least somewhat of an understanding of the work involved, the time commitment, we're going to be looking for nominations for a vice chair of this task force. Don't everybody jump at once.
Well,
Or
rather
maybe you
than
need
asking
more
for
other
nominations,
information.
how about we ask for interest? Now, be
Interest, we
clear,
could do.
you've got 2 chairs, so unless we both get hit by a truck, there's probably not going to be a super big lift involved here. However, there are inevitable vacations and other things, in which case the vice chair would fill whoever, ever one of us is gone in terms of doing the joint decision making. So if any of the 5 of you have interest, could you please like wave at us or wink or something? Everybody's
Nobody-
looking
nobody-
down like, I'm not
nobody-
doing any of that.
Nobody dares blink for fear it'll be interpreted as a wink.
Right, exactly.
I nominate Mr. White because he's got previous experience in this and been doing this for a while. He's got the experience.
I'll second
I'll
that.
second that.
A third that. See, I think that's almost
Sorry,
a full
sorry,
majority
buddy.
right there.
Yeah, there we go. That
Not
works
my
for
vote.
me.
Ooh.
Okay, so I would entertain a motion that Paul White be elected the vice chair of said task force.
So moved.
So
All
moved.
right,
So
we have a motion and a second. Callie, did you get that? Very good. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye or raise your hand. Aye.
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 Hi.
Anyone wish
Yes.
to abstain?
Abstain.
One abstention from himself.
Paul, if I were you, I would check to make sure that the co-chairs are prohibited from riding in the same vehicle at the same time.
Right. Excellent suggestion.
Very good. Very
We
good.
thank you, Paul.
Well, I'm confident, knowing both of you quite well, that there probably will be nothing for me to do.
Oh, we'll have to go back to the drawing board, Commissioner, and see what we can assign, huh?
Yeah.
No. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. So, so we got through the agenda, frankly, more quickly rather than I expected. But we are on to public comment. And I think everyone noticed in the agenda that we did make a note that depending on the number of people wishing to offer public comment, we may limit the amount of time. And so I'm going to ask if you can, anyone wishing to make public comment, if you could raise your hand or somehow indicate that to us, we can make a quick judgment here on whether or not we'll need a time limit. So Mr. Sisk, advocate Stephen Whitaker, I see you. Okay, and right now I'm seeing no other hands. So typically we had hoped to limit public comment to about 10 minutes. So I would say 5 minutes each. Commissioner, agree?
Oh, no, look, let's give them each 10 minutes if they choose to take all of it, because we're well under our
We're
time.
well ahead. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I
So-
will, I'm going to start then with Mr. Sisk.
Okay, thank you, ma'am, and I'll get you ahead of schedule. I just wanted to introduce myself. I am a representative for Mission Critical Partners, and we are one of the leading public safety expert service providers in the country. And I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to participate virtually in the meeting.
Now
You're
that's the
welcome.
kind of public comment I can get behind. Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Sisk.
Thanks, and thanks for being here and for your interest in this work. Stephen, go ahead.
Now I get to pop Jen's bubble with public comment that she can't get behind. Stephen Whitaker for the record from Montpelier. I want to raise a red flag concern about your public records policy that appear to dictate rather than discussion, informed discussion and legal analysis. There's no provision in Vermont public records law that exempts any member of this task force from responding to public records requests on demand. I'm especially concerned with having the Department of Public Safety lawyers handle it, in that they have yet to respond to requests, dating back a year. The Department of Public Safety's lawyers have relied on a Supreme Court of Vermont decision that says, since there's no penalties in law, the 3-day production of records or the 10-day under unusual circumstances extension have no bearing, and they can take as long as the hell they want. And that the Supreme Court ruled those timelines are advisory rather than mandatory. That is fraught and should not be the policy of this task force. This task force needs to have an informed discussion about public records law, need advice, independent advice from an attorney about your individual obligations to respond to requests. I think I'm concerned about the NDA concept because it will trigger a classification system for every document that is generated in executive session. I agree that draft RFPs should not be circulated. They can corrupt the process or advantage one bidder or another. But for the most part, a level of conceptual system design. I've got maps of the state's microwave system that have been published for years. And now a recent request to the department says, oh no, those are top secret. I'm like, the system hasn't changed. The mountaintops haven't moved that much. So I just think this is an area that should not be, take the co-chair's word for it. This is stuff that the entire task force needs to discuss and get some expert advice on, not from the Department of Public Safety's lawyers. I've said enough about the NDA. I've never heard of it. Anything discussed in executive session. Well, actually, some people abuse executive session and discuss stuff that's not, they shouldn't be in executive session, and therefore I don't want those things captured under this fuzzy umbrella. The concept of ignoring the dates in the statute, I've never heard such a thing, that we're going to ignore the dates and hope to change them, and we're going to proceed with an RFP as if the law wasn't written on pen and ink. Y'all don't want to become outlaws at your first meeting, so I think you need to push back on that concept. Those dates might necessitate you focus on a pilot project since it's a smaller geographic area, but those dates were well considered and hammered and adjusted and extended in the committee process, of which I and the commissioner were involved. So I don't think you have any legal basis to ignore the dates. I want to see this process succeed, but I don't want you to start skirting the law at your first meeting. I'd like to see the task force discuss some ways that you could meet the deadlines that are there. There's a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of processes and protocols and workflows to develop. Thus, the discussion of pilot projects needs to be had, but that's probably the only way you're going to meet these statutory timelines, is figure out how big is this animal and how are you going to approach it. I see a 10-year rollout of hardening these systems around the state, and maybe 5 years on getting the cellular infill of the dead zones. But the first responders and the public who needs to call for help need those things now for the public safety and for first responder safety. So I highly encourage you to not take the advice of your co-chairs and ignore the statutory deadlines or ignore statutory law on public records obligations of individual members. That's probably enough for now.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. I would like to just ask a quick question. You seem to be suggesting that each individual member of the task force would become the keeper of the record, when in fact, there's only one keeper of the record, which is the Department of Public Safety and its role to provide administrative support. So how is it that we should stick to the dates in statute, but not to the role assigned the Department of Public Safety and statute as the administrative support for this project?
Administrative support does not include responding to an obligation to be a sole gateway for public records requests.
But there can only
That
be
looks
one
like a
keeper of the
paragraph.
records.
Say
There
it
can
again?
only be one keeper of the records. Who's the keeper of the
Right.
record if it's not the Department of Public Safety?
Each person who creates or acquires a record in the course of agency business is a keeper of their copy of that record. I can make
Okay,
a
but-
request to Calex for something that he obtained that was not in part of an executive session, and he's obliged to produce it because he's a member of the task force.
Your objections are duly noted and we will endeavor to find a solution to that. I do not suggest that you start pounding these volunteer organizations with records requests that will paralyze their ability to do their job in service to the citizens of Vermont.
I didn't intend to start pounding anybody because there's no records yet, but my point is that I don't want you to get off on a outlaw footing.
Appreciate that
So-
advice. We will take the recommendation around ignoring the dates into consideration as we work through this draft. I think that is a very valid comment to have this task force consider as we look at a draft of the RFP.
But you also don't have the authority to prohibit your members from releasing a record that is requested of them. That you assumed that you have that authority, and it wasn't discussed or made by motion that they would refuse to it, that the members would agree to refuse to respond to public records requests made to individual members. You impose that upon them as an inference, and it's just not true. The law doesn't back you up on that.
Well, we will seek some legal input on that and circle back to the group at our next agenda, on our next meeting. We can add that as a agenda item for our next meeting. Is a follow-up on the public records workflow.
Agreed.
Okay, is there anyone else who wishes to chime in for public comment? In the future, I believe we will be doing this at the front end of the meeting. But we thought it prudent to at least put some information out there before we sought public input at this meeting. Anything else from the task force members?
So once, it sounds like we're pretty much in agreement on a rotating or alternating Wednesday schedule. Who will the meeting invitations be coming from? From Callie or from?
From
Callie.
Callie. Yep.
Okay.
Very good, then I would accept a motion to adjourn.
I'll move we adjourn.
I'll second that.
Seconded.
All right, you've got a motion for Mr. White and a second for Mr. Kumitz, and all those in favor indicate by saying aye or raising their hand. Aye.
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 Looks unanimous, Callie. Okay, we are adjourned. Callie, you can stop the recording, and thank you everyone for your participation today. Look
Thank
forward
you
to
very
seeing you in 2
much.
weeks' time.
See you then.
Good